All right. So as you're bringing in money, it's not about the top of the line, so to speak. It's the bottom line. It's not top line, it's bottom line. So let's not focus on the screenshots that everybody puts in the forums. Let's focus on how much money is going in the bank and how you can keep more money in your pocket going into your bank account and not just have it flowing everywhere. And so to talk about that, I'm excited to bring on Tyler Jefcoat from Seller Accountant, who's also the host of the Return On podcast. So Tyler, thank you for coming on Maximizing E-commerce.
Kevin, it's a pleasure to be here, buddy. Good. I'm glad you had me.
Yeah, definitely. This is a subject that I think is extremely both timely and evergreen, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Totally does. Yeah, it's really it's never been. I kind of feel like there's like a kind of some moods that are clashing right now, right? It's actually objectively never been a better time to sell on e-commerce because overall macro behavior, like think about it, pandemic, grandma started shopping more on Amazon than she used to. Yes, we're dealing with some headwinds. So on the plus side, moving into entrepreneurship, even with inflationary pressures, investing in something that can grow has never been more important. But then there's this kind of like Eeyore sulky headwind mood that's happening also because of inflation, supply chain issues, and people kind of getting a little puckered up because things have been a little harder. And so like, I think it's maybe a really fascinating moment to be a seller right now because there's some psychology you're having to fight to be like, should I stay in? What should I pivot to? How can I ensure that I'm making money in a weird market?
Yeah, exactly. And one of my mental themes I've been giving myself, so we're recording this in June of 2022. So somebody listening to this in the future might be like, you guys are so off base with what you're talking about, but we don't have a crystal ball. But if we were to guess, I would say we might be technically in the middle of a recession right now. We don't know that yet because they came out that Q1 in the US was negative GDP, gross domestic product growth. So we went down in size as a country, essentially. And so 2 quarters in a row is a recession. So there's a good chance we're in a recession. There's inflation. There's all this other stuff going on. So as the old saying goes, it's not about the hand you're dealt, but how you play it. And one of my mental things I've been telling myself is I want to check out of any recession, or opt out, I should say. Opt out is the word I've used with myself, that I'm going to opt out of a recession. So let's talk about how one might actually do that.
Well, I mean, I think, yeah. So just to hit on the big picture you just said there, we are probably due for a recession, whether it's macroeconomically, technically we're in the middle of one. I mean, big recession at the end of the 2008, 2009, 2010. We've just been riding high for so many years now that we're probably due for one. And so to your point, Kevin, the biggest wealth transfer in history, in fact, if you were to say the number one wealth transfer in history and then the number 2 wealth transfer in history happened in 1929 as the market crashed and investor entrepreneurs didn't get out, but bought the right stuff. That was number 1. And then it was overshadowed. I don't know if you ever saw the great movie, was it called The Big Short with like Christian Bale and Brad Pitt? Great movie. But these guys that figured out, Steve Carell's hilarious, by the way, in that movie, but these guys that figured out how to bet with the market in a way to make money, even though things were really catastrophic in 2008, 2009, that was the greatest wealth transfer in history, was entrepreneurial investors choosing, as you mentioned there, to opt out of the recession, kind of keep a growth mindset, keep a ROI investor mindset, and say, what does this current set of circumstances make possible?
And I think you just hit the nail on the head there with current set of circumstances, because way too often we get into, I was doing it this way. And this is not picking on anyone. It's not e-commerce sellers. This is everybody in the world. In fact, some industries have been, this is the way we've been doing it since the 1950s. Well, chances are it's not. The next 50 years are not going to be the last 50 years. Or sometimes the last 5 months is not going to be an indicator of the next 5 months. And so you just have to kind of roll with where we are currently. So let's just talk about where we are as we're recording this. And this again is somewhat timely, but also evergreen in what we're talking about here. Because you mentioned 1920s, the dot-com, not the dot-com, but the 2008 crash, all the stuff happening. But we've got high inflation. We've got like some of the headwinds you talked about, the Eeyore-ish stuff of we can worry about like shipping costs and just in time is out of time. So, you have to order more inventory. So that's a strain on cash flow. So what are some other things you're seeing now to keep it timely, but then we'll get into maybe more timeless principles on how to manage
The
this.
other thing I'm seeing now, Kevin, is maybe what you guys have felt, but there was just an unbelievable amount of capital that entered the e-commerce space over the last 2 years through these aggregator investors. Several of those investors have had to retrench a little bit because things didn't go as well. If you think about it, if our just in time isn't in time anymore for our little $1 million or $500,000 Amazon brand, if that hurts us, you would maybe intuitively think that it's easy for like a Thrasio or a Heyday or Perch to deal with it, but it's actually multiplied. That same cash flow challenge, you just add 2 or 3 zeros to the back end of your problem, and that's their problem. And so the other thing we're going through in the market right now is a little bit of a, oh boy, maybe a win for common sense, Kevin, honestly, but we're going to have to retrench, learn how to operate these assets that we've bought if we're an aggregator. And so like in the near term, since we're talking about kind of the current state of affairs, you're probably going to have a harder time getting a premium multiple if you're selling your business right now. Whereas if you'd have sold it a year ago, multiples were pretty high. They're pretty frothy, as the investor guys say. It's probably a time to double down on investing on yourself and building the business versus trying to go to market like tomorrow.
Gotcha. So you're saying, from what you're saying, it's not necessarily impossible to sell your business.
No,
but it's probably not going to go for as much. And we're talking about multiples. And for those who aren't familiar, it's basically grossly oversimplifying it. But let's just say your profit times your multiple. That's what your business is worth. And if you have all these other headwinds, like increased ad costs, shipping costs, whatever, that's probably eating into your margins. So you have slightly less profit. So on both sides of that equation, it might be less than it would have been a year and a half ago.
Yeah. So what it kind of means is if, and maybe the flip side of that same coin is if I am in the blessed enough position right now where I have not seen any volume go down so far in 2022. I'm growing like a rocket ship. My trajectory is perfect. I haven't had the same supply chain issues. I've been lucky. My suppliers are healthy, and my margins, I have a strong enough product that I've been able to continue to command a pretty good market presence on Amazon or Shopify, however I'm selling products. If that is you, what you will actually find is the exact opposite of what Kevin and I just said, because there's still a bunch of money out there trying to acquire brands. They're just being much, much more selective. And so if you happen to kind of, and we could talk about the profile, but if you happen to fit that profile for a premium performer right now, you actually might be in a great power position to go ahead and sell. But if you're like the normal kind of average, strong, but not unbelievably strong seller, to your point, Kevin, you're probably going to want to just wait until these most recent months kind of get in the rearview mirror before you go to market.
Exactly. And, maybe you really want to sell because you're just burned out in the business or whatever, maybe, but you could keep going. So I tend to be more of the philosophy of just keep going. So I haven't talked about this in the podcast before, but I just signed a 2-year lease on a office/warehouse space. So I don't want to have to deal with nothing against 3PLs, but like I want more control of my destiny. And so I'm doing a little bit of kind of, we'll call it light manufacturing here. And so I'm taking control of a couple parts of my supply chain by having this space. So for those watching, like the background looks a little different than it did in some of the recent episodes of the podcast. That's why. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you're like, it looks kind of similar stuff. Like the face of the guy looks similar, but some of the background is different. That's why. So I'm in a different spot. So let's just walk through what are some things that maybe you don't have to go out and rent a warehouse space. But what are some things that you think people should do to get better control, traction, whatever on their business?
Well, I think the other thing about that growth mindset, the kind of opting out of the recession kind of mantra that we should have as entrepreneurs is um, we don't want to be depressed or mopey. We don't want to do the Eeyore thing, but we also
Mm-hmm.
don't want to sit still. And so when the
Mm,
market gets turbulent, it means it's time to think really critically about, let's start with our customer. I always love that old kind of Bezosian adage where they would put the empty chair in the boardroom at Amazon to kind of represent the customer. She's here, she's in the boardroom, she matters as we're talking about our products. And I was talking to a really successful high 7-figure seller today, and that's been his strategy. This guy's still making a killing as a reseller, and he's
mm,
able to command a premium on Amazon as a reseller of some of these brands because he pays attention to the details. He understands what his customers want. He has better listings. He understands how to leverage, like you're talking about the light manufacturer. He knows how to like kit and couple accessories with
mm-hmm.
core products to differentiate. And so when things get turbulent, the smart entrepreneur goes into the cave for a minute and says, okay, I can't keep doing the same stuff because the winner of tomorrow is going to be a little different than the winner from yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to choose to be the winner for tomorrow. How can I focus? Like, for instance, for you, Kevin, I'm going to actually choose to take my last mile warehousing or last part of my manufacturer. I'm going to choose to take that in house
Mm.
because that gives me more control. I can be more nimble. I can be more responsive to my customers. That might give me a competitive advantage. Now, you're going to have to tell us in a few months if that does or not. But I think it's time to do some experiments for delivering more value to your customer. Like the days, we know this by the way, but Amazon version 1.0 was Amazon. Amazon 2.0 was you throw anything online, you can sell it. 2016 was version 3.0, where if you had to do, you obviously need to do PPC. And now we're kind of seeing the dawn of Amazon 4.0, where you're going to have to really fight to differentiate your offering from your sea of competitors. But guess what? It's still possible. Like you can still have a superior product or communicate superior value to your customers. And those brands are still excelling on the marketplace and they're still making a lot of money right now.
Awesome. So, all right. So let's change hats here. So now we talked about kind of more philosophical where we're at, philosophical, like kind of opting out and, having a strong product and whatnot. Let's talk more brass tacks of like, okay, so let's say I came to you and I handed you, here's reports as the seller accountant. What do you want to look at? And what do you usually start zeroing in on or suggesting people to do so that they can make sure that they aren't just recycling money, but actually making money?
I kind of heard two questions there I'm going to answer, and then you tell me which one I should dig into
So
more.
go into whatever you'd like from there.
So the first thing is if I'm a third-party merchant, I'm a seller on Seller Central,
Mm-hmm.
knowing where to get the best financial data is kind of step one. And so you don't really want the business reports section for your accounting. You actually want the payments report that if you've ever heard of the unified transaction report, that's kind of your date range payment
Mm-hmm.
report. That report is gospel. That is the
Mm-hmm.
report that actually ties to the penny to what Amazon's going to be paying you every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And so truly understanding your fees, refunds, and sales after Amazon does the clawbacks and all the other stuff that they do, you got to lean towards payments. And then I think everyone who's doing more than $10,000 a month in sales needs to have some kind of a web-based accounting system. At Seller Accountant, we choose to use QuickBooks Online. There are other guys out there that use Xero. Those are probably the two, Xero or QBO. And so find a way to book your sales and your cost of goods sold each month. And here's going to be the test. So if you're trying to say, Kevin, how do I know if I'm doing this already right now? Because I probably have an accounting system. I would say go into your Xero or QuickBooks Online and pull up your profit and loss statement for the last 3 or 4 months. So kind of imagine them in your brain in columns next to each other. And then calculate your gross profit percentage. So for instance, let's say I sold $100,000 in May. and my gross profit, so after like cost of goods sold and Amazon fees, was whatever, it's 20,000. I had a 20% gross margin. But then if I look at June, or if I go back to April, all of a sudden my gross profit was twice that or was negative. Like, in other words, if I look at my overtime margins and they are schizophrenic, they're all over the place, that tells me that I'm not properly bringing the accounting data from Amazon into my system. And you'd be like, who cares? My tax guy doesn't care. He files my taxes and we're fine.
He says, just give it to me for the year.
Yeah, just print out that one report, the 1099K, and I'll do it. The issue is, can you imagine trying to drive your car with mud on the windshield? Right? It would be lunacy. You're going to fall off one of the ditches and you're going to crash. And so trying to drive a business where, margins matter. Like Kevin, if you and I sell a big consulting gig where the only expense is our time, we can, and we even can't afford to do this, but you can imagine that we could be sloppy with our pricing, because all it is my time. If I get it wrong, I make it a few extra bucks an hour, a few less bucks an hour. But if you're selling a product where you are maybe going to make 20% margin on it and you get it wrong, you're going to be struggling for cash flow, paying too much in interest expense. And the bigger danger is not about taxes. The bigger danger is crashing your car in the ditch where you can't run the business anymore.
Good points. Good points. Okay. So really, and that's a good analogy of the windshield of, where are you going and understanding where you're at, going back to kind of a similar thing, what we were talking about before, of understanding where you're at now. You don't want to focus too much in the rear view mirror of, oh yeah, last year was such and such a way, but like, where are you now in recent? Now in finance, accounting, you tend to be a little more historical, but you want to make sure the history you're looking at is still relatively recent, Well,
and parts of it are historical. Let me say this, your track record for how much, like for instance, take something really simple. Let's say you did $1 million in business in 2021. And if you were to look at your inventory bucket, whatever that is, it might be Amazon plus another warehouse, plus Kevin's garage, plus a 3PL, right? The whole thing.
Right.
How much money did you have tied up in your supply chain? You can actually do really quick math. You can say, okay, I did $1 million in sales last year, and I needed to have $200,000 in inventory to generate $1 million in sales. That's really actually a helpful anecdote, because what that tells me is, okay, if I'm going to double to 2 million in sales, okay, I'm going to need to double the amount of inventory I have. And guess what? Doubling inventory means doubling the amount of cash I need in the business. And so to your point, the historical data is really helpful for knowing what my track record is for generating profit with what I invest my inventory. But you also need to have a dashboard. You need to have something, whether it's there's a million of them out there, Helium 10, Cellex, Tecometrics, pick one that you're already spending money on for your keywords or something else. And don't neglect looking at your profit dashboard so that you can see not just rear view mirror like last month, but today. What are my margins on selling my hero product? Oh, wow, I'm slipping relative to last month. So I just need more real-time data so that I can make good choices and pivot.
Yes. So you can make more real-time data decisions based on recent history, 3-month history, whatever the case is. I mean, it's all about where the trajectory you're going and how do you change it. So to your point, like if you have you need $200,000 of inventory to make the amount of sales you had over the course of a year, that if you want to double that, you would need either 400,000 or figure out some sort of way to not need as much inventory in there, whether it be, shortening this cycle from your supplier, how many days of inventory you're keeping on hand, a variety of things. And some things are going to be outside of your control. And so where can you get the control? Hence, this is a thought exercise I've given myself of why I signed a lease for a warehouse. And so,
and one of the things you mentioned there was like lead times to receive inventory. Another thing that can sometimes be forgotten by sellers is if I can just get my suppliers to let me pay 1 or 2 weeks later than I'm currently paying, like then if you think about it, if I were to do my days of inventory, and let's just say I have 180 days of inventory on hand on average.
Sure.
If I can get my supplier to get me 30-day terms, I now have 150 days of inventory for no other reason than that I haven't had to part with my hard-earned cash until 30 days later. And so it's like if you're looking for the simplest hack to improve your cash flow as a seller, it's invest a few minutes a week of your time into cultivating and nurturing those relationships with your suppliers, where you can go to them in a time like this where it's weird and say, "Hey buddy, I really love being your customer. I'm struggling here. Can you help me? Can I get an extra 30 days?" And we've had clients over the last year get substantial relief because guess what? These guys need you to be healthy also. Like they want to be
Oh
good
yeah.
partners. Not all of them do, but a lot of them do.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. And for those who have not been through a recessionary type environment, um, your suppliers will be more willing to work with you than you probably realize. And I'll use an example of, so when I was in 2008, because I was in the hotel business at the time. So we had contracts that oftentimes were signed years out, that during, this 4-day window, XYZ Corporation or the association of whatever is holding a conference at this hotel, and they are guaranteeing they're going to sell 1,000 rooms a night or whatever the case is, and that they're going to spend $400,000 on food and beverage or whatever it was. Well, you can imagine 2000, late 2008, early 2009, there's a lot of, well, we need the hotel to partner with us. And I thought there'd be a lot more, you have a contract, you signed it, tough. There was a lot more of, well, let's walk through this, because there, just thought exercise here. There was a major accounting firm was supposed to hold a conference at our hotel, and it was going to cost them, let's say, $2 million to hold the conference or $1 million to cancel it. And so they said, here's your $1 million, which actually, if you do the thought exercise, it'd be more profitable to just take $1 million cancellation fee than to actually implement a $2 million conference. But think about the relationship. You think they want to come back to the hotel if that's the way they're going to be treated? So people are going to remember. And so your suppliers know you will remember how you were treated. Now, granted, the flip side, when they need something from you, as long as it's within reason, work with them so that when these things come up, and you might be on the flip side, because they have recourses too, because they probably have suppliers they're working with that they're probably going to and saying, hey, raw metal company that we use to make tumblers, because I'm holding a tumbler, we need to work with you to have better terms, whatever. So like there's a lot of this going through the entire supply chain. So the point being, it's not just going to be you asking, so you don't have to go with it. Like you can't necessarily go with like the tone of, you must do this for me. Like don't strong arm, because they'll remember that on the negative side. But if you go to them and like, hey, how do we work on this together as a partnership? You'd be amazed at what the reciprocation you're going to get.
Remember, Mama always said you get more flies with honey than with vinegar, right? So this is one of those moments too. If the pandemic weren't still slowing us down a little bit, my counsel would be, next time you can go fly to China, because it's been such a slowdown because of the pandemic that, and maybe you can do this right now, by the way, but the guys that I had, friends of mine, clients of mine at Seller Accountant, that got the absolute maximum exit last year, really premium multiples, premium exits. Those guys had really done the work of what you just said, Kevin, viewing my suppliers as partners and then actually meeting with them. Like it's crazy, but at the end of the day, you and I are meeting via Zoom right now. Mm-hmm. People are going to consume this content on YouTube or wherever else you post it. But at the end of the day, we're just humans. Like I'm a dude sitting in my office working. You're a dude in your new warehouse office, and your suppliers are just a dude or a lady sitting in their office. And if we can find ways to actually make it to where we're on the same side of the table, solving a problem together, to your point, you will find your suppliers to be very, very good partners. But you gotta earn that. It's kind of like if I were to make a dumb decision and end up getting put in jail, the right time to call someone to come bail me out is not when I haven't talked to him in 2 years, right? I mean, the time to develop that relationship is let me call my brother once a week and hang out with him and make sure I help him. And then if I need something down the line, he's going to be a good friend to me. But if I've just ignored him, I never return his calls. I never reply to his emails. He asked me to
Mm.
come help him move a box. I never come over. And then all of a sudden I get in a pickle and I'm like, hey buddy, would you loan me money or would you bail me out? Well, guess what? He's probably going to tell me to go take a hike. And I think we got to start viewing our supplier relationships similarly. Let's make deposits into that account of those relationships because they may need our help in ways we can help them, and then we may need their help, that kind of thing.
Okay, good deal. So, all right. So basically the gist there was go back to your suppliers and uh, make whatever concessions, partnerships, because at the end of the day, to your point, if you have 180 days worth of inventory, but you've only paid for 150 because you took the third, I mean, you're still paying for it, but you're just shifting it a little bit. That 30 days worth of inventory is cash that you can use to buy another round of inventory or something like that. So, whatever you can do to improve that cycle.
Well, because it's really about like, instead of having to have a $300,000 loan. So think about it this way, every dollar that I beg, borrow, or steal is money that I'm going to be on the hook for as the CEO of my company. So if I can get some relief from my suppliers, instead of having, let's just keep the numbers around, instead of having that $100,000 stuck in my business, I can't get to it. I can't pay myself. Mama wants to buy a vacation. I can't pay her either. Right. I mean, I got the whole situation. Well, if I can find ways to make my business more efficient with how it uses cash, have a shorter cycle, which is what you just described, then I get to have a smaller loan, which means less risk, or I get to have a more freedom to pay myself as the owner of the business instead of having to hoard that cash in my business because I got to pay for inventory. And so it's just something to not, I just want to say this as a CFO, there are two pillars I'm looking at. I'm looking at profitability and I'm looking at cash flow velocity. And I might be able to get you the same result pulling either lever, but they're both important. And so if I look at a business, for instance, that has pretty good margins, but they only turn their inventory once a year, the first place we're going to start in a CFO discussion is, okay, let's see if we have any SKUs that are dead weight. We're only selling one a day, but we've got 1,000. Or let's see if we have any product stuck. Maybe we need to liquidate the green one because it's not selling. Let's call our suppliers and see if we can develop those relationships. And then once we get that tightened down, now let's take a look at your margins. How are your listings? How's your A+ content? How's your PPC efforts? Do you need to be outsourcing that to a team? And then once we get that second pillar, now we can start calling Kevin and saying, hey, how do we get international? How can we take this healthy machine we have now and move it to a new market? That kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So where can you bring in more sales? Where can you improve your margins? Where can you improve your cash flow? And cash flow, I think, is one of those things that like we never truly know what it's like until you're in it, because you kind of think, profit minus costs, sales minus cost equals profit, if I can figure out the equation. But you kind of think of it through that way. But you don't realize that there's a lot more ebb and flow along the way than, with your personal bank account. It's like whatever you're bringing in, let's say if you have a job, what you're bringing in from your job minus your bills, whatever's left over, that's kind of your profit. Whereas in business, there's a lot more moving pieces. And so having, like we talked about, better managing your cash flow is a big thing. So then that opens up more opportunities for you. So tell me a little bit more about what are some things you would look at from a margin standpoint.
So the most important, so if you were to pull your profit and loss statement and kind of put that little percentage on the right-hand side so you can see what each is a percentage of sales, the two lines that matter more than any other line, one is your cost of goods sold, the actual product, what does it cost me to get my tumbler, like you had over there, into the warehouse, ready to sell. And, if you think about it, like if you were to pull up your P&L and that number was 25%, let's say I sell the tumbler for $100, it cost me $25. The percentage is, if I wanted to improve it, I can either get the product cheaper or I can raise my price, right? Those are my two levers I can pull. So the first most important thing I'm going to look at is what's my COGS? Do I have good COGS like 20, 25%? Do I have okay COGS like 30, 35%? Or do I have really lean margins like 40, 50% of my COGS? Second line item I want to look at is advertising. So my direct marketing expenses. And let me just give you a quick rule of thumb here, because lots of business models make money in e-commerce and in Amazon. If I can have that COGS number, so again, picture that $25 tumblers, that's a 25%, plus my advertising be less than 50% total, I'm okay. If it's at 40% total, I'm great. So let me unpack that a little bit. So if I have a 25% cost of goods sold for most products, they're not oversized, they're pretty easy to ship, I can afford to pay up to 15, 16% in total tacos, and I might be okay. It's an you said this earlier, it's an oversimplification because there's so many other variables.
But that's good. I've never heard of it phrased that way. Anyone say, because usually we're looking at it from a couple different standpoints of like, what is the percentage that you're bringing in, after Amazon fees, or what percentage of your sales is Amazon fees, what percentage is cost of goods sold, what percent is tacos, whatever. But I've never heard it phrased that way. And that makes a lot of sense. And I got to go back and do that exercise of what is your tacos plus your COGS for a product, and what is that percentage? So you're saying 40 to 50% would be healthy, but not more than that, of course.
Well, here's the thing about it. Like if you're a reseller, your COGS might be like 50% already, period. You might just have to be parking the product. And that just tells you, this intuitively. That means I don't have any money to spend on advertising because I'm a reseller. I've already eaten up my margin just buying the product. That's okay. I've got guys making lots of money doing that, but they've got to be really careful. And the ones that get in trouble as resellers pay the 50% to get the product and then pay another 10% to advertise it. Now, by the time you add those Amazon fees, you're kind of in trouble. And so
you're just taking money to buy more product, and the cycle continues without anything going in your pocket.
Working really hard to make Bezos a little bit richer, and we want to stop.
Okay.
And so for the guys here's the thing: the more margin I have on my product, the more I can afford to advertise, to buy the real estate, to compete with my competitors for it. And so this makes sense, right? If I have a highly differentiated product, what that means is that I can charge a lot more than I had to pay to buy the product. That means I've got a premium product and I can afford to advertise it more to get it to move. If I've got a more commoditized product, nothing wrong with that. It just means my product is a little bit more similar to everything else that's like it on Amazon. I'm going to need to be a little meaner and leaner, especially with my advertising, to stay afloat.
Yes. And so that makes a lot of sense. And I like going at it from that angle, because too often I see people are like, yeah, but I have a quote unquote relevant keyword and I feel like I need to be at top of search. There is no award for top of search.
That's right.
There's only an award for money going into your bank account. No one's actually going to give you an award but yourself. And so what you're doing this for is to be profitable. And so if you have to raise prices or lower your bid so that you're not top of search. Now let's do a little thought experiment here. So follow along with me. If I raise my price, I might lower my number of units I sell, but I might actually take home more money. Is that possible?
It is. And in fact, we have some sellers doing the opposite right now, where even though container costs are triple what they were 2 years ago, even though you can sometimes get your stuff stuck in the LA port for 3 weeks before Amazon can receive it or it can get into the States, even though there's a little bit of lower sessions in a couple of categories on Amazon, people are still, let's spend as much money as possible advertising. And so think about how much insanity that is, to pay double the advertising, make very little money, only to turn around and pay triple the cost to get a container into the country. Right. And so the point is their optimized profit arc might be, let's slow down and sell 10 a day instead of 20 a day, but sell them at a margin that's more acceptable that we're happier with.
Right, exactly. Like position yourself as a premium brand. And, there is, again, there's no award for top of search. And if you have to go after more profitable long tail keywords, and one example I like to use, and I don't have one in front of me, is let's say dry erase marker. So if I had a green dry erase marker, let's just pretend this is dry erase marker, but it's not. So I'm holding up a green marker. Let's just pretend it's a dry erase marker. green dry erase marker is going to do a lot better for this theoretically than just marker. But too often people are just going after marker or whatever the more quote unquote relevant keyword is, but maybe it's not as relevant to the customer. Or people will say, I won't go after red dry erase marker as a keyword, but that still might be better for you than just marker because it's still more. So you got to test these things and figure out what's going to work for you and not try to be top of search for the top keyword.
That's why it's so powerful, by the way. Hearing you say that, Kevin, I'm like, yes, like, cause I'm not a seller, I'm a CFO. I'm like, that makes so much sense. You really need to have your PPC team, your whether it's, hiring an agency or training your internal staff, you really have to understand what you just said. Like, how do I pick the right length of phrase for my keywords where I'm not. I was actually advising a board for a small aggregator earlier this week, and we were looking at some targets to maybe buy. And it's interesting looking at the PPC reports of these targets. So these are small brands that we were looking to buy. And it's like seeing how much of the advertising dollars are actually productive. What I mean is they're actually resulting in sales versus I'm just driving awareness because I just wanna, right? I mean, but as an Amazon seller, if I'm just driving awareness, I got to be careful because I can spend a lot of money bidding on marker when actually I just wanted those two teachers. I wanted those two ladies in Middle Florida who were looking for the green marker because they're willing to pay a premium and they want my marker. So if I can understand what the actual phrase is that converts with my customer, I can be more profitable.
Exactly. And just know that if you're working with folks, and let's say you have someone doing your PPC for you, and this is not a knock on people that do PPC, but just understand maybe the arrangement you have. And so if the arrangement is based on spend, the most honest person in the world is going to, if that's how they're bringing money to the bank in their own business, their incentive is to spend more, not necessarily to be more profitable. If you're the business owner, your incentive really is to be more profitable. So just make sure, even if someone's incentive is to spend more and they're great at what they do, whatever, but just keep in the back of your mind with a grain of salt, like what strategies are they doing? And is that really bringing in more money? And another way to look at it was, which I really love this, was the COGS plus tacos for a product. And what is that number, and start managing to that number a little bit more, which I'm going to be doing. So I learned something here. So this was a super insightful conversation. So any closing advice to folks with the finances here?
No, I mean, we were talking about the current state of affairs just being a little bit of a bearish market. I just think having a little bit of cash, so just being a little bit conservative with your spend so that if you did have a shipment be delayed or you had a little bit of a misfire on your advertising, that you're not dead meat.
Right.
I think that's one piece of advice. Just be a little bit more conservative and don't spend every dollar you have. And then just when things get a little weird, make sure you're measuring, like that exercise that we talked about earlier about, like, I need to know, even if it is rearview mirror, I need to know if I'm profitable or not. If you don't know for sure that you're profitable, you don't have to hire me, but hire somebody or do your accounting, just so that you can answer the question. It's amazing how many times we'll go to a conference, Kevin, everyone wants to talk about their sales, but sales is vanity. You kind of mentioned this at the top of the show. Sales is vanity, profit is sanity. And so just make sure that you're not working your butt off to make Bezos money instead of your family money.
Exactly. Everyone else around you is getting paid, but you're not. Well, good deal. Awesome. So for folks who wanted to learn more from you, where would they go?
So two things I'd mention is selleraccountant.com, SELLER accountant.com is my accounting practice, CFO practice. We'd love to serve you. And then return on podcast. It's kind of like return on investment, but return on podcast is what happens when you take a podcasting nerd and combine them, like has a baby with a CFO, you end up with a podcast called Return on Podcast. So that's my weekly show. Those would be good ways to connect with us.
Awesome. We'll have links to all that in the show notes for those watching on YouTube. This will be in the description below. So awesome. Well, Tyler, thanks for coming on and appreciate you sharing your knowledge.
My pleasure.